Julian was obsessed with me to the core. He had a miniature biochip implanted in the bone of my left ring finger. If I moved more than 1,000 meters away from him, or if my heart rate exceeded 120 beats per minute, he would drag me back to that pristine white cage like a madman. Everyone in New York envied me, a golden canary pampered in Julian's clutches. But no one knew that to truly trap me, he had personally cut off my brother's life-saving bone marrow supply. He thought that by breaking my wings, I would forever be subjugated to him. But he forgot, a golden canary, pushed to its limits, will also peck out its owner's eyes and tear them apart. In the VIP lounge of a top-tier charity gala, the air conditioning was set impossibly low. I was wearing a red velvet backless gown, my back already drenched in cold sweat. Deep in the bone of my left ring finger, the miniature biochip pulsed with a sharp, piercing pain as my heart beat too fast. It was a warning, a ticking time bomb. Bang! The heavy wooden door was locked from the inside. Before I could even turn around, a large hand clamped down on the back of my neck. The immense force, radiating a destructive pressure, slammed me against the dressing mirror. In the mirror, Julian stood impeccably dressed in a suit, exuding an aura of controlled power. But his eyes were as sinister as a viper eyeing its prey. Just now by the exhibition stand, that man's coat brushed your left shoulder, Julian murmured, his voice so gentle it could drip, yet imbued with an icy chill. In that exact second, your heart rate shot up to 130. Mia, were you feeling something for another man? Or were you signaling for help? I wasn't, I just bumped into him by accident. My voice trembled as I frantically shook my head. Julian didn't listen. He scoffed, tearing off his silk tie with one hand. Julian, don't do this. There are people outside. My plea was roughly cut off. Julian used the tie to tightly bind my wrists, tying me to the back of the chair. The silk dug into my pale skin, instantly leaving glaring red marks. He turned to the bar, grabbed a bottle of high-proof liquor, and pulled out a handful of rough medical cotton balls. Things that get dirty need to be cleaned. Julian walked back, ruthlessly tearing open the red velvet over my left shoulder. My rounded shoulder was instantly exposed to the cold air. He twisted open the bottle, pouring the stinging liquor directly onto the cotton balls. A pungent smell of alcohol permeated the air. The next second, the rough cotton ball was pressed firmly against my left shoulder. Ah! I cried out in pain. Julian's hand didn't stop, like a madman in the throes of OCD. He scrubbed with all his might, repeatedly, at that patch of skin. The rough cotton ball, mixed with the liquor, scraped away my delicate epidermis like sandpaper. It hurts. Julian, I'm hurting. Please stop scrubbing. Tears streamed down my face, and I struggled violently in the chair. The chip in my left ring finger, due to my accelerated heart rate, released an even stronger electrical current. The double torment pushed me to the brink of fainting. Julian ignored me. He stared intently at my skin, pressing harder and harder, until my pale shoulder was scrubbed red and raw, oozing glaring blood. Crimson streaks flowed down my arm, dripping into the red velvet, blending seamlessly. Only then did Julian stop. He tossed away the blood-stained cotton ball, and with alcohol-scented fingers, gently stroked the bruised and bleeding wound. See, now it's clean. He smiled, satisfied, then leaned down and pressed a kiss on the edge of the wound. I spasmed from the pain, gasping for breath. I lowered my head, biting my lower lip hard, not daring to make another sound. I knew too well that resistance would only invite more sadistic torment. Julian straightened up, pulled a neatly folded piece of paper from inside his suit jacket, and tossed it lightly onto the dressing table. It was the ICU bill from New York's best hospital. Ethan's bone marrow match. I've had it intercepted overseas. Julian reached out and pinched my chin, forcing me to look up. Stay by my side. Be the good little canary you're supposed to be. As long as you're obedient, your brother will live. If you dare to harbor any improper thoughts again. His fingers tightened abruptly, knuckles turning white. I'll immediately cut off his ventilator and make sure he has a very ugly death. I looked at this man in the mirror, towering, controlling everything. Tears flowed down my pale cheeks, and I trembled as I nodded, my voice fragmented yet utterly submissive. I understand. I'll be obedient. Julian released my chin, satisfied, then untied the silk from my wrists and gently tidied my messy hair. That's right. There's a cocktail party tonight, come with me. Julian turned and walked into the bathroom to wash his hands. Listening to the rushing water, I slowly raised my head. In the mirror, the fragile, fearful canary had vanished. I stared at the fresh blood on my shoulder, my downcast eyes no longer holding fear. Instead, there was a boiling intent to kill. In the middle of the night, my phone ringing sliced through the dead silence. I jolted awake. The moment I answered the call, my blood ran cold. The hospital had issued a critical condition notice. My brother, Ethan, had a severe lung infection and wouldn't make it through the night. The bone marrow transplant had to be done immediately, and the exorbitant surgery fee was also due by the deadline. And the successfully matched donor and the life-saving money were all in Julian's hands. I didn't bother to put on shoes, stumbling into the master bedroom. Julian leaned against the leather headboard, carelessly swirling half a glass of red wine. Seeing my disheveled state, a sneering curve tugged at his lips. He already knew. Please save Ethan. I dropped to my knees on the cold floor. Julian looked down at me from above, as if I were a dog. He put down his wine glass and got out of bed barefoot. His large hand suddenly gripped my long hair, dragging me out without mercy. A tearing pain ripped through my scalp. Biting my lip hard, I stumbled and crawled on the floor, shielding my head with my hands. At the end of the corridor was a giant glass conservatory. Outside, the rain poured down, thunder roared. The conservatory had no heating. It was cold as an ice cellar. Julian suddenly flung his hand, slamming me hard onto the white tiles. He walked to the liquor cabinet and pulled out several bottles of fine red wine. Bang! 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 Bottle after bottle exploded around my feet. Dark red wine splattered, and sharp glass shards covered the floor. Julian grabbed a large bunch of red roses from the flower bucket. He tore off the petals with his bare hands, then violently threw the thorny stems into the scattered glass shards. He took off his silk robe, tossing it onto the back of a chair. He then sank into the velvet sofa, crossing his legs, his gaze sinister. You want money? You want the bone marrow? He pointed at the wreckage, a mix of glass and thorns. Show me your sincerity. Dance for me right on that. Dance until I'm satisfied. I stared at the execution ground before me, a place that could cripple my feet. The chip in my left ring finger sensed my heart rate soaring, releasing a bone-chilling microcurrent. I didn't hesitate, didn't beg. I slowly stood up, my bare feet stepping without hesitation into that dark red wreckage. My first step landed. Sharp glass instantly pierced the soles of my feet. Blood welled up. I spasmed from the pain, biting down hard, forcing back a cry of agony. I slowly raised my arms, striking a classical dance opening pose. Lightning flashed, its pallid light illuminating my bloodless face. Second step. Third step. The glass shards dug deeper and deeper, firmly embedded in my flesh. Rose thorns savagely cut my ankles, tearing open my skin. I began to spin. Every jump, every landing, was a heart-piercing, bone-chilling pain. Cold sweat drenched my nightgown, clinging to my back. Red wine and blood mixed together, dragging out shocking crimson trails on the pure white tiles. I was like a crimson butterfly with broken wings, forced to dance on knife edges. Julian leaned back on the sofa, staring intently at me, watching my pained, enduring face, watching my movements, still submissive despite the pain and spasms. The brutality and excitement in his eyes peaked. His breathing grew shallow, his gaze feverish like a madman's. This was what he wanted. He wanted this proud golden canary to be completely crushed, her soul forced to grovel at his feet. 10 minutes stretched out like a century. The soles of my feet were raw and bleeding, deep enough to see the bone. After completing the final spin, I finally couldn't hold on, collapsing heavily into the shattered glass. Shards dug into my knees and palms, bleeding profusely. I gasped for breath, struggling to look up. My eyes were broken, submissive, gazing up at the man on the sofa. Julian was finally satisfied. He stood up and walked closer. His leather shoes squelched sickeningly on the blood and wine. He bent down, stroking my sweat-drenched face as if caressing a beloved pet. Such a good girl. He dialed Mr. Davis, his assistant, instructing him to transfer funds to the hospital, to have the donor ready overseas on standby. After hanging up, Julian scooped me up from the floor into his arms. Does it hurt? He asked, knowing full well, his voice resuming that chilling tenderness. I leaned against him, my nails digging hard into my palms, suppressing the urge to tear him apart. I forced out a fragmented smile. No, it doesn't. Thank you, Julian. Julian chuckled softly, then carried me swiftly out of the conservatory. I lay on his shoulder, looking back over his neck. On the white tiles, there were countless bloody footprints. The searing pain in my feet and knees pulsed through me. I closed my eyes, hiding the monstrous killing intent within. From beginning to end, I hadn't shed a single tear. I finally understood. As long as Julian lived, my brother and I would always be lambs to the slaughter. Julian had to die. I would flay this madman alive with my own hands, send him to hell. In the bedroom, the smell of blood was pungent. Dr. Oliver, Julian's chief private physician, knelt on the carpet with a medical kit. He shone a powerful flashlight on my feet and gasped. Glass shards had pierced through the skin, fragments embedded in the bone seams. Dr. Oliver picked up a pair of tweezers, clamping onto the largest piece. Bear with it, he whispered. As the glass was pulled out, blood welled up. I bit down hard on the pillowcase, cold sweat soaking my nightgown. Yet I didn't utter a sound. Cleaning, disinfecting, applying medicine. The only sound in the room was the sharp clink of tweezers against the tray. Julian had gone to the office. In the four corners of the bedroom, surveillance cameras blinked red. I stared at a camera, then suddenly reached out. The water glass by the bed tipped over. The water streamed down the nightstand, precisely hitting the power strip on the carpet. Sizzle. The camera screen went black, the red light extinguished. Local power outage. Dr. Oliver's hand paused, and he looked up sharply. Don't be nervous, I said, leaning against the headboard, my voice weak yet chillingly calm. I tampered with the power strip. The backup power won't switch over for 10 minutes. For these 10 minutes, Julian is blind and deaf. Dr. Oliver's brow furrowed. Ms. Amelia, what are you planning? I stared at him, my eyes like knives. Dr. Oliver, 14 years ago, at the Southwood Orphanage. If it weren't for my mother anonymously donating that $50,000 for your overseas tuition, you'd still be working odd jobs in a shady clinic, not serving as Julian's lackey here. Dr. Oliver's face changed drastically. Clang. The tweezers dropped into the tray. How do you know? He stared intently at me. That money was anonymous. It took him 10 years to find out the benefactor's surname was Lynn. My mom gave me all the donation records before she died. I pushed myself up, closer to Dr. Oliver. Dr. Oliver, you're a man of loyalty. You've been secretly looking for my mom all these years, haven't you? Dr. Oliver's throat moved, speechless. My mother was driven to her death by Julian's family. My eyes were bloodshot, my voice laced with ice. Now Julian is threatening my brother's life, treating me like a dog. I held out my left hand, my ring finger right in front of Dr. Oliver. Beneath the skin, the biochip pulsed with a faint glow. If my heart beats too fast, or if I leave the designated range, this thing will discharge electricity, I sneered. Dr. Oliver, you're a skilled physician. You must know that prolonged exposure to this kind of bioelectrical stimulation can lead to a nervous breakdown. Dr. Oliver stared at the chip, then at my feet, deep enough to see the bone, his eyes filled with shock and internal struggle. What do you want me to do? Dr. Oliver whispered. Help you remove it? No, once it's removed, Julian will receive an immediate alert. I'm not removing it. My eyes hardened. I want him dead. Dr. Oliver shot up. Ms. Amelia, you're insane. Julian's security is airtight, and all his food is checked. You can't kill him. I'm not killing him. I stared coldly at Dr. Oliver. I want him utterly disgraced to become a complete madman. Dr. Oliver, help me. Consider it repaying my mother for saving your life. Dr. Oliver fell silent, looking at the woman before him. Battered yet fierce as a wolf, the scales in his heart finally tipped. He knelt down again, reaching into the bottom compartment of his medical kit, and pulled out a thumb-sized transparent glass vial. A colorless, odorless liquid. New type neurohallucinogen. Dr. Oliver pressed the vial into my hand. 1 drop each time. Regular blood and urine tests won't detect it, I guarantee. What are the effects? I clutched the vial. It slowly erodes the central nervous system. Dr. Oliver's expression was grave. Initially severe insomnia, irritability, paranoia. Long-term use will induce extremely realistic, terrifying hallucinations, eventually leading to severe mania. By then, not even a miracle could save his mind. I looked at the vial, a cruel smile playing on my lips. Good. This is perfect. Dr. Oliver continued to explain. It must be taken continuously for at least half a month. No interruptions. You'll have to find a way to mix it into something he consumes daily. Amelia, once the arrow is shot, there's no turning back. If we're exposed, we both die. I hid the vial against my body, under my clothes, my eyes showing no trace of hesitation. Don't worry. I'm not even afraid to die. Why would I be afraid of him finding out? Dr. Oliver quickly bandaged my foot wounds and packed up his medical kit. The backup power is about to activate. Dr. Oliver instantly reverted to his cold demeanor. Don't let the wounds get wet. Change the dressing regularly. Just as he finished speaking, the lights flickered. The red lights on the surveillance cameras came back on. Heavy footsteps sounded from the corridor. The door opened. Julian walked in, bringing with him a chill, his gaze sweeping the room like a hawk. What happened? Why did the monitoring cut out? Julian walked to the bed, looking down at me. Dr. Oliver lowered his head. Mr. Julian, I accidentally knocked over a water glass earlier, short-circuiting the power strip. It's all cleaned up now. Julian scoffed, his gaze falling on my foot. The thick bandage was oozing glaring blood. Are the injuries taken care of? Yes, they are. No bone damage, but she needs rest. Dr. Oliver replied flawlessly. Julian waved his hand, dismissing Dr. Oliver. The door closed. Julian took off his jacket and sat on the edge of the bed. He reached out and touched my pale face, his fingers deliberately brushing my chapped lips. Were you scared when the power went out? His voice had reverted to that sickening tenderness. I suppressed the churning in my stomach, submissively pressing my face into his palm, like a bird completely tamed. No. I knew you'd protect me, Julian. Julian smiled, satisfied. He leaned down and pressed a kiss on my forehead. Good girl. I closed my eyes. The glass vial pressed against my chest was cool, yet it felt like a burning fire of revenge. My foot injuries hadn't even scabbed over when I got out of bed. Changing into Julian's favorite white silk nightgown, I walked barefoot into the kitchen, sending away the terrified housekeepers. Grinding brewing. Boiling water poured in. A bitter coffee aroma filled the air. In the rising steam, I stood with my back to the surveillance camera, pulling the thumb-sized transparent glass vial from the hidden pocket of my nightgown. I pulled out the stopper. My wrist tilted slightly. Drip. The colorless, odorless liquid fell into the dark coffee, instantly dissolving. I picked up the white ceramic cup, glancing at my left ring finger. The chip beneath the skin lay dormant. I suppressed my heart rate, then turned and walked towards the study on the second floor. The door was ajar. Julian leaned back in his executive chair, flipping through documents, his brows furrowed. I pushed the door open, walked in. The coffee was gently placed on the mahogany desk. Julian looked up, his gaze like a knife, finally settling on my bandaged foot. Who told you to get out of bed? His voice was sharp. You didn't sleep well last night, so I wanted to make you a cup of coffee. I didn't flinch, meeting his gaze with soft, submissive eyes. Julian narrowed his eyes, scrutinizing me. He was accustomed to my fear and trembling. This active attempt to please him felt novel, yet it also made him suspicious. He reached out and pinched my chin, forcing me to look up. Mia, what game are you playing now? My eyes shimmered with unshed tears. I reached out and covered his hand, gently rubbing it. Julian, I've thought it through. My voice was as light as a feather. I can't escape you. As long as you're willing to save Ethan, I'll listen to whatever you say. I'll be a good girl from now on, okay? Julian stared intently at me. The chip in my ring finger remained still. My heart rate was steady, indicating no lies. The gloom in his eyes receded. He released his grip, then pulled me into his lap. You should have been this obedient earlier. He picked up the coffee, brought it to his lips, and took a large sip. I leaned against his chest, listening to his steady heartbeat, watching that sip of black coffee, laced with hallucinogen, slide down his throat. In the blind spot where Julian couldn't see, a chilling curve played on my lips. Over the next half-month, I transformed. Shedding all my defenses, I became the perfect golden canary. Whatever Julian wanted, I gave. Even the most disgusting, perverse requests, I accepted completely, proactively accommodating him. Every morning, a spiked cup of black coffee was served without fail. Julian reveled in my submissiveness. His guard dropped sharply. He no longer constantly monitored the cameras, even allowing me to stay in his study to organize documents. I acted like a beautiful, thoughtless doll, quietly categorizing files. In reality, I was burning his access passwords and project vulnerabilities deeply into my mind. Half a month later, the effects of the drug became evident. Sleep was the first thing to collapse. Julian began having sleepless nights, waking up in a cold sweat even after taking sleeping pills. His eyes were bloodshot, his temper extremely volatile. Late one night, a loud crash exploded from the study. I threw off the covers and rushed over. Mr. Davis, his assistant, stood outside the door, drenched in sweat, not daring to provoke him. I pushed the door open. The study was a wreck. Antique vases lay shattered on the floor, papers flew everywhere. His laptop was smashed against the wall, its screen fractured. Julian stood in the center of the ruins. Like an out-of-control beast, his eyes bloodshot, his chest heaving violently. He stared intently at the shadows in the corner, guttural gasps escaping his throat. Get out! All of you get out! He screamed frantically at the empty air, veins bulging in his neck. The hallucinogen was starting to damage his nerves. He was experiencing hallucinations. I walked barefoot, stepping over the scattered ceramic shards, approaching the madman on the brink of rage. Hearing footsteps, Julian spun around. He gripped my throat, slamming me against the bookshelf, with enough force to nearly crush my neck. You want to harm me. All of you want to harm me. Julian gritted his teeth, his eyes wild and unfocused. I couldn't breathe, my face flushed, yet I didn't struggle. I painstakingly raised my hands, cupping his twisted face. Julian. I managed to gasp, my voice incredibly gentle. It's me. It's Mia. No one wants to harm you. Despite the searing pain in my neck, I hugged his trembling body tightly. Don't be scared. I'm here. I'll always be with you. Those words were like a spell. The madness in Julian's eyes abruptly paused, and the strength in his hands instantly left him. Like a drowning man grasping for a piece of driftwood, he wrapped his arms around my waist, burying his face deep into my neck. He took deep breaths of my scent, his whole body trembling. Mia. Mia. He murmured incoherently, his pathological dependence peaking at that moment. Don't leave me. My bones ached from his tight embrace. I reached out, gently stroking his back, soothing him like a rabid dog. Looking up at the opulent crystal chandelier, my eyes were as cold as ice. The copper scent of old blood and spilled Cabernet Sauvignon always seemed to linger in the corners of the study, no matter how many times the terrified maids scrubbed the floorboards. Julian's head rested heavily against my shoulder, his breathing ragged and uneven. His fingers, calloused and twitching with the residue of his daily tremors, were still wrapped tightly around my waist. He held on to me with the raw, desperate strength of a drowning man clenching a piece of driftwood. I didn't move. My hands, cold and steady, slowly traced the lines of his broad back, soothing the tight, knotted muscles of his spine. My face remained a mask of absolute, submissive devotion, though my eyes were fixed on the polished obsidian fireplace across the room, reflecting nothing but the cold red glow of the embers. Mia, Julian muttered, his voice muffled against my neck. Did you see them? In the corner. They were standing behind the drapes. They had knives, Mia. They wanted to take my keys. There is no one here, Julian, I whispered, my voice as soft as silk, as light as a feather. The curtains are closed. The doors are locked. No one can get to you. I've checked the perimeter myself. You wouldn't lie to me, would you? He raised his head, his bloodshot eyes searching my face with a desperate, pathetic hunger. The sharp, handsome lines of his jaw were covered in a rough, unkempt stubble, and the dark circles under his eyes looked like bruises. Never, I said, offering him a warm, gentle smile. I'm your canary, Julian. I have nowhere else to go. The biochip beneath the skin of my left ring finger let out a faint, warm pulse. My heart rate was 68 beats per minute. The machine believed my lie. The next morning, Mr. Davis, Julian's chief of operations and a man who had served his family for 15 years, stood before the desk. He was holding a thick leather folder of quarterly financial statements, his face pale, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool air of the study. Mr. Julian, Davis said, his voice trembling slightly, the board of directors is requesting a meeting. The Blackstone Group's stock has fallen 5% this week due to the rumors regarding your health. Some of the major investors are demanding a formal medical evaluation. Julian's hand tightened around his black ceramic coffee cup. He had already drunk half of it, the half that contained 3 drops of Dr. Oliver's colorless, odorless neurohallucinogen. A medical evaluation? Julian whispered, his lips curling into a cold, vicious snarl. He looked at Davis, his eyes unfocused, a dark, paranoia-fueled anger flaring up in his chest. Who told them? Who told the investors I was sick? Was it you, Davis? No. Mr. Julian, please. Davis took a half step back, his hands raised. I've been trying to manage the rumors. I told them you were just resting after the New York summit. He's lying, Julian. I spoke from the leather armchair near the window, not looking up from the book I was reading. My voice was quiet, almost casual. Yesterday afternoon, when you were in the conservatory, I saw Mr. Davis in the courtyard. He was on his phone talking to someone named Sterling, the head of the rival firm. He was telling him that your hands were shaking. Davis whipped his head toward me, his eyes wide with horror and disbelief. Mia, what are you talking about? I was talking to the Port Authority. I've never spoken to Sterling in my life. I saw the screen, Mr. Davis, I said, turning a page of my book with a soft, dry rustle. You had his contact open, and you looked very pleased with yourself. Julian stood up from his chair. The movement was so sudden and violent he knocked the coffee cup onto the desk, the dark, spiked liquid spreading across the quarterly reports. He didn't care. He walked around the mahogany wood, his eyes wild and bloodshot, his chest heaving under his silk shirt. Get out, Julian said, his voice dropping to a register of absolute, cold-blooded finality. Mr. Julian. I said get out. Julian screamed, his voice cracking as he grabbed a heavy bronze paperweight and hurled it at Davis's head. The paperweight missed by inches, shattering the glass panel of the antique bookcase behind him. Davis didn't wait for a second throw. He scrambled out of the study, his leather briefcase slipping from his hands, his boots scrambling frantically against the polished floorboards. Vance, Julian roared toward the doorway. His personal security chief stepped into the room, his face pale. Sir. Davis is fired, Julian hissed, his hands shaking violently as he gripped the edge of the desk. Strip him of his security clearance. Lock him out of the main server. If he tries to enter the building, shoot him. Yes, Mr. Julian, Vance said, scurrying to execute the orders. I closed my book and stood up, walking slowly toward Julian. I didn't look at the shattered bookcase, and I didn't look at the black coffee dripping from the mahogany desk. I wrapped my arms around his neck, leaning my head against his shoulder. You did the right thing, Julian, I whispered, my voice sweet and calm. He was a traitor. They all are. Only I can be trusted. Julian turned, his fingers digging into my waist with a bone-crushing force as he pulled me into his chest. Yes, only you, Mia. Only you. In the blind spot behind his shoulder, my lips curled into a cold, mocking smile. The first string of his empire had been severed, and he had cut it himself. By the third week, The mental deterioration of Julian was no longer something that could be hidden behind closed doors. The high-end salons and corporate boardrooms of Manhattan were filled with nothing but whispers of the Mad King of Blackstone. He had fired 5 of his most loyal vice presidents in 10 days, replaced his personal security detail 3 times, and spent his nights pacing the corridors of his estate, carrying a loaded sidearm and screaming at the ventilation shafts. He believed the walls were hollow. He believed the Valentis, the rival syndicate, had installed microtransmitters in the brickwork to record his thoughts. Dr. Oliver, I said, sitting on the edge of the examination table in the private clinic room. My feet had finally healed, the thick bandages replaced by thin, elegant silk wraps, though the scars on the soles were still red and tender. Oliver was checking the biological metrics of the biochip in my left ring finger. His face was grim, his eyes darting toward the security camera in the corner, which we had temporarily disabled by short-circuiting the wall outlet. Again, the drug is working faster than I anticipated, MS. Amelia, Oliver whispered, his hands shaking slightly as he replaced his tools. His central nervous system is in a state of chronic, hyperactive arousal. His cortisol levels are 10 times the normal limit. If he continues at this rate, he will suffer a complete psychiatric collapse within 10 days. Good, I said, my voice flat. But he still has control over the Blackstone Group's central trust. If he collapses before he signs the transfer documents, the board will appoint a legal guardian, and we won't be able to touch the funds for Ethan's surgery. What do you want to do? Oliver asked. Increase the dosage, I said, looking at my left ring finger. 2 drops in the morning, 3 at night. I want him to experience acute auditory hallucinations during the International Merger Conference tomorrow afternoon. Oliver's hand paused on his medical bag. He looked at me with a mixture of intense respect and sheer, cold-blooded terror. At the merger conference? Front of the federal regulators and the foreign investors? Ms. Amelia, if he breaks down there, Blackstone's stock will fall to junk status by dinner. That is the point, Dr. Oliver, I said, offering him a polite, gentle smile. I want him to watch his father's empire burn before he goes to hell. The next afternoon, the grand conference hall of the Blackstone Tower was packed with New York's most prominent corporate figures. Julian sat at the head of the long mahogany table, his black suit immaculate, but his skin was a pasty, sickly yellow, and his fingers were constantly twitching against his leather folder. I sat on a smaller chair behind him, half hidden by the shadow of the tall velvet curtains, wearing a simple, dark green dress. To the investors, I was just his beautiful, quiet accessory, the golden canary he brought to show off his absolute possession. The merger with the Zurich Group, the lead investor, a tall, elderly Swiss banker named Mr. Sterling, said, his voice carrying the calm, heavy authority of old money, requires a joint security guarantee from the Blackstone Central Trust. Don Julian, we need your signature on the master ledger. He slid the thick, leather-bound document across the table. Julian reached out to pick up the gold pen. Sizzle. The sound was faint, like the static of a dead television line, but to Julian's hypersensitized ears, it sounded like a scream. He froze, his pen hovering just inches from the paper. What is that? Julian muttered, his eyes darting toward the air conditioning vents on the ceiling. Mr. Julian? Sterling frowned, his brow creasing. Is there a problem with the contract terms? The vents, Julian whispered, his voice rising, his throat bobbing as he stood up from his chair. They're talking. Can't you hear them? They're saying the ink is poisoned. They're saying you've put microtransmitters on the paper. The entire room went dead silent. The investors looked at each other, their faces turning from confusion to hollow, pale disbelief. Don Julian, Sterling said, his voice dropping into a cold, clinical register. There is no poison. The paper is standard sheepskin. Liar, Julian screamed, his voice cracking as he grabbed the heavy gold-plated pen and hurled it at Sterling's face. The pen struck the banker's cheek, leaving a thin, bloody line before falling to the mahogany table with a sharp clink. You're working with them, Julian roared, his chest heaving under his shirt as he grabbed the master ledger and tore the pages out with his bare hands, throwing the shreds into the air like white autumn leaves. You want to take my canary? You want to take my sister? Vance. Shoot them. Shoot them all. He pulled his loaded sidearm from his shoulder holster, his eyes wild, bloodshot, and completely out of focus as he aimed the weapon at the terrified investors. Julian. No, I screamed, throwing myself forward and wrapping my arms around his waist from behind, my face buried in his back. It's me. It's Mia. No one is going to hurt you. Put the gun down. My heart rate shot up to 135 beats per minute. The biochip in my left ring finger let out a powerful, bone-chilling electrical current that made my entire arm go numb. The pain screaming through my nerves, like red-hot needles. But I didn't let go. I squeezed my eyes shut, holding on to his waist with all the desperate strength I had left, my nails digging into his thing. Mia. Julian gasped, the madness in his eyes abruptly pausing as he felt the warmth of my body against his back. The gun in his hand trembled, his finger slipping off the trigger. Mia, you're here. They wanted to take you. I'm here, Julian, I whispered, my voice shaking with the pain of the electrical current. I'll always be with you. Put the gun down. Let's go home. He slowly lowered the weapon, his chest heaving, his body shaking like a leaf as the security guards finally rushed into the room, their faces pale as they escorted the terrified, bleeding investors out of the hall. As I lay on his shoulder, let him carry me out of the building, I looked back. Over his shoulder, the master ledger of the Blackstone Group was in ruins on the floor, and the golden crest of his family's empire was lying in the dirt, completely broken. The bedroom of the estate was dark, lit only by the red, blinking lights of the surveillance cameras in the four corners of the room. Julian lay on the bed, his breathing heavy and rattling under the influence of the high-dose sleeping pills Dr. Oliver had given him. He was completely out, his fingers still clutching a lock of my long hair, as if he were afraid I would vanish the moment he closed his eyes. I sat on the edge of the bed, my left hand resting on the nightstand. Dr. Oliver knelt on the carpet, his medical kit open, his face covered in sweat. In his hand he held a small, silver scalpel and a portable, high-frequency signal simulator. The backup power strip is tampered with, Ms. Amelia, Oliver whispered, his hands shaking slightly as he sterilized the scalpel. We have 8 minutes before the central monitoring room notices the signal loop. If we aren't done by then, the guards will lock down the estate. Do it, I said, my voice flat. Oliver didn't hesitate. He took my left hand, his fingers pressing against the raw, bruised skin of my ring finger where the biochip had been implanted 6 years ago. This is going to hurt, he said. I can't use the deep anesthetic because it will affect your heart rate metrics on the monitor. I can only use a localized block. Just cut it out, Oliver, I said, my eyes fixed on the ceiling. The cold steel of the scalpel bit into the side of my finger. The pain was sharp, hot, and sudden, a searing fire that made my entire hand spasm. I bit down hard on a leather belt I had placed in my mouth, my sweat-slicked fingers clenching the edge of the mattress until my knuckles turned white. Blood, dark and hot, welled up from the incision, dripping onto the white sheets. Oliver worked with the fast, frantic precision of a military surgeon. He used a pair of fine tweezers to bypass the delicate nerve endings, his fingers moving deeper into the bone seam until the tweezers made a sharp, metallic click against the titanium casing of the chip. I have it, Oliver gasped, his forehead dripping with sweat. He gently pulled the miniature biochip out of my bone. It was no larger than a grain of rice, its silver casing covered in my blood, its tiny red transmitter, light still blinking with a slow, rhythmic pulse. He immediately placed the chip into the portable signal simulator, connecting the wires to a small battery-powered cloner that began to transmit a steady 72 beats per minute biological signature to Julian's monitoring screen. To the machine, I was still sitting on the edge of the bed, my heart rate calm, my body stationary. The incision is closed, Oliver said, wrapping my finger in a tight, sterile, white silk bandage. The signal loop is stable. You have 24 hours before the battery on the simulator dies, Ms. Amelia. After that, the alarm will go off. I stood up from the bed, my left hand wrapped in the white silk, my body feeling light, almost hollow, as if the heavy, suffocating chain that had bound me to this house for 6 years had finally been broken. And the bone marrow? I asked, my voice cold as ice. The donor has already been flown to the Zurich private clinic, Oliver said, packing his tools. The transfer was signed by the board's emergency regent this morning. The surgery is scheduled for 10 tomorrow morning. Your brother will live, Amelia. I walked to the bedside, looking down at Julian's twisted, sweat-slicked face as he slept. The man who had broken my wings, who had made me dance on shattered glass, and who had treated my brother's life like a toy, was now lying at my feet, his mind destroyed by his own pride. I reached down, my silk-wrapped fingers gently tracing the lines of his jaw. Enjoy your dreams tonight, Julian, I whispered, because tomorrow morning, you wake up in hell. The grand glass conservatory was silent, save for the heavy, rhythmic thud of the rain against the curved panels above. The storm had returned to New York, the dark clouds turning the afternoon sky into a dim, watery gray. Julian stood in the center of the ruins. The white tiles were still stained with the dark, dried red of the wine and the blood from my dance. He was wearing his black formal trousers, but his shirt was unbuttoned, his chest covered in sweat, his hands shaking violently as he held his loaded sidearm. Mia, he screamed, his voice cracking, his throat raw. Mia, where are you? The monitors say you're in the bedroom, but the room is empty. Why aren't you answering me? He shot at the shadow in the corner, the loud report of the gun shattering a tall terracotta flower pot, sending dirt and dry leaves flying across the tiles. They took her. Julian whimpered, his knees buckling as he dropped to his knees. In the dirt, his head resting against his hand. The Valentis, they took my canary. They're going to break her wings. No one took me, Julian. A cold, clear voice echoed from the entrance of the conservatory. Julian whipped his head toward the door. I stood in the doorway, wearing my dark blue trench coat, my hair pulled back, my left hand wrapped in the tight white silk bandage. Behind me stood Mr. Davis, the chief of operations he had fired, flanked by 6 federal marshals carrying warrants. Mia. Julian's face lit up, a sudden, pathetic joy breaking through his madness as he tried to stand up, his hands reaching out toward me. You're safe. You came back to me. I knew you wouldn't leave me. I didn't come back to you, Julian, I said, my voice completely devoid of the soft, submissive tone I had used for half a month. It was cold. It was the voice of a judge passing sentence. I came to watch the end of the show. The show? Julian's eyes narrowed, his brow furrowing in confusion. He looked at my left hand, at the white silk bandage, and then at the portable signal simulator Davis was holding. The biochip is gone, Julian, I said, taking a slow step toward him. The signal loop is broken. The Blackstone Group's assets have been frozen under a federal RICO indictment. And your father's board of directors has formally stripped you of your title as CEO. No, that's impossible, Julian whispered, his head shaking violently. I am the Don. I control the passes. I control the money. You control nothing. Davis spoke from behind my shoulder, his voice cold and unyielding. The federal marshals have already locked the towers. Your private accounts have been liquidated to pay for the outstanding civil suits. You have nothing left, Julian. Julian looked at his sidearm, his eyes widening in a sudden, wild fury as he aimed the weapon directly at my chest. You did this. You poisoned me. You've been putting things in my coffee. I did, I said, my voice calm, flat and steady. I gave you your own medicine, Julian. The same medicine you used to slowly kill my mother. The same medicine you used to keep my brother in that ICU. I took another step closer, the sharp glass on the floor crunching under my boots. But I didn't kill you. I wanted you to live. I wanted you to live in this cage. Forever, watching the walls talk, watching the shadows carry knives, and knowing that the proud golden canary you tried to crush was the one who pulled the floor out from under your feet. I'll kill you, Julian shrieked, his finger tightening on the trigger. Bang. The shot did not come from Julian's gun. One of the federal marshals standing behind Davis had fired, his tactical rifle, bullet striking Julian's right shoulder with a high-velocity force that made his weapon fly from his hand, spinning across the blood-stained tiles before falling into the dirt. Julian fell back onto his knees, his hand clutching his bleeding shoulder, his eyes wide, bloodshot, and completely broken as he looked up at me. Mia. He choked out, his voice breaking into a sob. Please don't leave me. In the dark. The shadows, they're coming. I looked down at him kneeling in the mud at my feet. The king of Blackstone. The monster of my nightmares. He was kneeling in the same spot where I had danced barefoot on his glass shards, his hand reaching out to touch my hem like a beggar pleading for a scrap of bread. Goodbye, Julian, I said. I turned and walked out of the conservatory, my blue trench coat trailing through the dirt on the floor, leaving him to face the dark, howling winter of his own mind. The private medical center of Zurich was quiet, the white snow of the Alps visible through the massive glass windows of the VIP recovery wing. Inside room 602, the only sound was the steady, quiet beep of the heart monitor. Beep, beep, beep. Ethan sat on the edge of the bed, his face no longer pale, his breathing clear. And deep under his clean hospital gown, the transplant had been a flawless success. His blood count was normal, and his eyes were bright with a healthy, youthful light I hadn't seen in 10 years. Mia, he said, offering me a warm, genuine smile as the door opened, and I walked inside. The doctor says I can go outside tomorrow. He says the snow is clean. You can go anywhere you want, Ethan, I said, walking to his bedside and gently stroking his hair. My left hand was still wrapped in a thin, elegant black silk wrap to hide the surgical scar, but my fingers were light and steady. The world is yours now. And Julian? Ethan asked, his eyes darkening slightly at the name. Where is? He's in a safe place, Ethan, I said, looking out the window at the white peaks of the mountains, a place where the walls are very thick and very quiet. At the Belmont Psychiatric Sanatorium in upstate New York, the security was absolute. The walls of the solitary confinement cell were lined with soft, white padded leather, devoid of any sharp edges, any glass, or any metal. There were no cameras, no microphones, and no windows. Julian sat in the center of the padded floor, wearing a white straitjacket, his arms pinned tightly to his chest. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, and completely unfocused, staring intently at the empty air in the corner of the room. He was twitching violently, his mouth parting as he let out a low, incoherent murmur that sounded like a lullaby. Mia, Mia, he whispered, his head shaking from side to side. Don't light the diffuser. The smoke has knives, Mia. They want to cut my hair. He looked at the padded door, where a small, transparent glass viewport was built into the wood. A woman was standing behind the glass. She wore a bespoke, dark blue silk suit, her hair styled in an elegant, professional twist. On her left ring finger, a simple, gold band sat over the thin surgical scar, a duplicate of the one her mother had worn. She didn't speak. She didn't open the door. She simply stood there, her cold, clear eyes looking down at him through the glass with the quiet, devastating satisfaction of a victor who had survived the arena. Julian looked at her face, and for a fraction of a second, a flash of genuine, biological recognition seemed to break through his madness. His body went rigid, his breath catching in his throat. Mia, he screamed, his voice muffled by the padded walls. Mia, you're here. You've come to take me home. He threw himself against the heavy glass viewport, his forehead hitting the surface with a dull, heavy thud. But the woman did not move. She did not run to him, and she did not cry. She slowly raised her hand, her silk-gloved fingers pressing against the glass, right over his eyes, blocking out the light of the corridor. Sleep well, Julian. Her voice, silent and unheard, echoed through the glass. Because in this cage, there is no more dawn. She turned and walked down the quiet, pristine corridor of the sanatorium, her high heels clicking softly against the concrete, leaving the Mad King to face the dark, endless night of his own cage. I walked out of the building, my black sedan waiting for me in the bright, warm sunlight of the parking lot. The canary was gone. The cage was burned. And as I started the engine and drove back toward the city, I knew that the lamb had finally, completely claimed the throne, and the sovereign of the North was finally, beautifully home.